really from a distance perspective, and we don't really think of the notion of timing. How do we do that? Well, how does timing relate to how we move? So what I would like to submit to you today on this download as your homework is take a look at the timing of your motion. There are ways wherein we can start zoning out, blading the body, and employing our fence. And all of these ways can be extremely manifest, very nervous, or they can be very, very casual. And one of the best ways to make it casual is to start playing with divergent timings, meaning that in the time it might take me to take a single step, or perhaps a double step to readjust, I would like to have more than just one or two hand motions. I don't want to have this going on, because it becomes very synced, very obvious, very fused. It starts to look defensive. It starts to encourage the bully to come out. If somebody's extremely aggressive, it might actually excite them and escalate them. But if in the time of me taking a single step, I now begin to move my hands 5 or 6 times with different gestures, now the action becomes much more hidden. If, for example, I would continue to take small adjustment steps like this, I'm going to take 3 separate steps, and I'm going to do them on a 1 steamboat, 2 steamboat, 3 steamboat kind of count. If I was to do that with very, very entrained symmetrical hand actions, asking you to stop, I've asked you to stop, please stay back, it becomes quite desperate, quite purely defensive, and very obvious to an aggressor. But if instead I start to mask that in a jumble of hand actions, I break away and I use different rhythms with my hands. And as I'm talking, I create what I term a casual blur, which is a behaviorally justified system of movements with my hands. I can now take those 3 steps in a way that's far less obvious, far less apparent, far more hypnotic, if you will. So one of the first homeworks you have on this download is to start to look at the speed of your hands. I can speak at the exact same rhythm that I move my hands, or vice versa, move my hands at the exact same rhythm that I speak. This will serve to reinforce what is being said. But if I begin to move my hands at the exact same rhythm as I step on a very predictable cadence, this now serves to emphasize the footwork. And we don't want to emphasize defensive footwork. I want to keep it looking as casual as possible. Even in a more sportive dynamic, if I'm working with my hands and I move my feet very, very obviously, the few scenarios where that serves us is if I'm trying to intimidate you and I'm trying to show you me coming in. But all of that is usually just a deception. If I'm trying to get away from you and be deceptive, my hands are going to move in a variety of ways as I take my steps. I'm going to have more hand movement than steps, and they will not be at the same rhythm. And this all begins with me talking. Even if I'm just going to churn onto my left foot, and then onto my right foot, back and forth. I could do this forgivably at a very, very even rhythm. But as I do that natural swaying motion, I keep my hands moving. Sometimes helping me to define my limits, I could be really agitated with my hands, very active, like, whoa, I didn't know that was your car, man, I'm terribly sorry. Or I could be super casual, swimming and swimming, making very manifest gestures over to one side, freezing one hand and having the other one aiding and supporting that gesture. I could have my hands barely moving at all as I'm stepping, and then suddenly jab out to one direction and take it back. I could have very slow motions, and in the context of those slow motions, make one really fast action to see if I can bait a response or help suddenly define my limit, such as talking to someone like this, and as we're talking at an even entranced pace, of, whoa, be careful, don't step on that, or hey, how are you? And I wave to somebody, imaginary or real, over their shoulder. So these are all examples of how I can use my hands to break the rhythm of my overall being. My hand rhythm and my hand gestures moving at a different speed and at a different volume from my feet. So I would like you to think of this as you go throughout your day today. As you're talking to people, perhaps the gestures will be much more like I'm talking to you in an elevator. Very, very small actions. Maybe they're going to emphasize how my eyebrows are moving, how my volume of my voice is changing, right? Giving a pause to frame a smile to indicate that this is a joke, or maybe to indicate that it's really, really serious. And then as I'm talking, maybe I'll play with very, very small gestures and then make a larger one. But I start to play with having different rhythms, cadences, and volumes in my hand gesture. As I'm walking through the street, most of the time we walk with a hand and foot rhythm as well. And so I can start to look at, can I move my hands faster than my feet? So if I'm walking at this cadence, rather than having my hands casually moving at the same rhythm, I can start to look at moving my hands a little faster, or having my hands do different actions. Now, when we come into the domain of aggression cues, one of the aggression cues that we look at to know that somebody is being cognitive and perhaps intending to attack is so-called incongruent timing. If somebody is moving at a very, very steady rhythm with their body, but then they have one hand that is moving at a very, very continuously slow and sort of non-symmetrical speed, we know that this can never happen naturally. It must be a cognitive, conscious action. So if I had somebody acting like this, talking to me, being really, really casual, but my back hand was very slowly creeping to the back, make no mistake, this is always intentional. We can learn this as a cognitive strategy to teach our eyes to look for it, but instinctively as animals, we also feel quite suspicious if it's obvious. If we see somebody reaching, going slowly back with an arm, we know this to be artificial, and it sort of sets off warning bells. So remember that even if the person in front of us is untrained, if it becomes too manifest that something is moving at an asymmetrical or sort of non-synced speed, it sets off warning bells. We want to keep things hidden. If both of our hands are moving and it's very, very justified in a behavioral context, you won't quite well notice the feet moving at a slower pace. Or if I was trying to get into the back, rather than having a slow creeping hand going to the back, I might make multiple actions with my hands, tethering it on occasion to my body, always bringing it back to a very small locus of movement so that I could slip it to the back without noticing. So as I'm talking, one hand might be much larger, both are passive, but then you don't really notice when I suddenly turn and reach for something as much as you would if I was creeping in a very manifest and obvious way. So homework for today, learn to move your hands at a different volume and a different speed from the pace and the rhythm of your feet.